Hello and welcome to a new episode in the Data Science Daily series. And we are continuing with the Python Bootcamp. So it's going to be list comprehensions, set comprehensions, and dictionary comprehensions today. You might be wondering, what do these terms actually mean? In the last session, we discussed control flow statements in Python, where we discussed the conditional statements if, else, and else if, and we discussed the loops like for loop and while loop, and also statements how do you break these loops in between, or how do you skip to different iterations within these loops. Today, we are going to discuss how do you make your code much more easier to run and to understand for a new person reading the code. So we are going to talk about these concise ways of using loops, using conditional statements to create data structures. So there will just be one line of code, right? And it's a comprehension. Without further ado, let's get started. All right. So we are going to be talking about comprehensions in Python. Now, comprehensions are a powerful way to concisely create and manipulate new data structures like lists, sets, and dictionaries. So we are going to be talking about comprehensions for these three data structures. Why only these three? What is common between these three data structures that, let's say, tuples or frozen sets do not have? Does anything come to your mind? All right. So these data structures are mutable. That's the reason why we can use, comprehensions to create different kind of data structures, right? Different lists, different sets, different dictionaries. Tuples are not mutable. So that's one of the reasons why we don't have comprehensions for tuples. Similarly for frozen sets. Comprehensions offer a more compact and often more readable alternative to the traditional for loops. Here is a breakdown of the key points. There are three main types of comprehensions. We talked about list comprehensions. This is the most common one that you would find, right? And that you would use perhaps. Set comprehensions also exist. Did you know that? And dictionary comprehensions also exist. So list comprehensions, then dictionary comprehensions are the second most common, and then set comprehensions as well. These are having the conciseness ability. They can express complex operations in a single line of code compared to multiple lines that we need to write for loops. Readability. They are having very clear syntax, and this improves code readability, especially for common operations. And sometimes comprehensions can also be more efficient than for loops. So these are the benefits of using for loops, of using comprehensions. And we will understand, how do you create a comprehension? What does it actually mean? What would you need to do if you were not using a comprehension to execute the same logic? Before we get started, one more additional thing, right? We are learning all of this, but let's also have a fun fact. Why do we call comprehensions, right? So this is coming from set theory, where when you're defining a set, right? If you remember set theory, what you learned in high school, if you're defining a set, you can define a set using certain rules as well in set theory. Remember, that is not the set in Python, that's the set of set theory, right, in mathematics. So there you can define a set using some rules, and those entire rules, right, when you put that in a notation, that's called a set comprehension, right? So you're actually basically giving logic how to create that set in set theory. That is where basically the word comprehension comes in Python, where it is used in a similar way, but obviously the syntax is much different. All right. Now let's start with list comprehensions. Okay. I want to create from this numbers list, which is numbers 1 to 5, right? I want to create a list. So I want to create a list of squared numbers. How do I do that normally? Remember from the control flow statements class, I would do for number in numbers. Remember, number can be, this variable can be any name. It doesn't really matter, right? So I'm just saying for number in numbers, first I will need to create a squared numbers empty list. Okay. I'm then going into a for loop. I'm saying for number in numbers, squared numbers dot. So I want to add the square of that number in the squared numbers list. So I would use dot append and then in brackets number to the power of 2. Right? This double asterisk basically is to the power. And this is what would happen. And when I print squared numbers, it will be this. Right? It is a list containing the squares of all the elements in the list numbers, original list numbers. Now, how do you do this? Do the same thing using a list comprehension. Now, list comprehension allows you to do the same thing. So you basically define squared numbers is equal to, and then you use the same square brackets because that is the bracket for a list. And then this is what you do. You say number squared, or you can let's make this similar. So make number squared for number in numbers. So what this will do is it will first take the number 1. That's the first element in the list numbers. It will calculate the square of that, which is 1 itself. Then it will go to the next element, which is 2 in the list numbers, calculate the square of that, append it, right? So 1, 4 will come. Then it will go to the next element, which is 3. It will make the square and then append it. And so basically it will give you this output. Right? So you will basically get the same output, and you will see that you can see how compact this is, right? How easy this is. So this is what is the power of comprehensions. And we have 2 more sessions where we will dive into different kind of operations you can do, multiple complex operations you can do with comprehensions. We'll talk about nested comprehensions and so on. But the basic concept should be very clear. Right? This is what you're doing, number squared for number in numbers. And you can do any other operation as well, right? The right-hand side will always be for number in numbers, right? This is the loop part of it. And the left-hand side, basically, you are defining kind of an operation. All right. Let's come to set comprehensions, right? So set comprehensions create new sets from iterables. Similar to list comprehensions, they offer a concise alternative to using set with for loops, right? And this is just the formal syntax, right? The syntax is actually very, very similar to what we have. Let me paste this for list as well. The only thing which changes is that the bracket changes, right? Okay. So let's go through this formally. New set is equal to expression for item in iterable, right? So for each item in that iterable, that main data structure which you're iterating over, you need to actually calculate an expression. So this defines what happens to every element, and a new data structure gets created. And you can also add an if condition towards the end. So don't worry about this if condition. We will come to this later. So this is the basic syntax, right? This will become more intuitive once you see an example, right? So letters, I'm creating a string called letters with the string hello world. Now, the goal is to create a set containing only unique alphabetical characters from the string letters, right? So I will define, without using comprehension, I will just define an empty set. Remember, you define an empty set using the set function, not using the curly braces, because using empty curly braces is actually a dictionary. This is not a set. Not a set. So you define a unique letters empty set. Then you iterate for letter in letters, unique letters dot add letter. Remember, to add elements to a set, you use the add method, right? And this is what we do. So what will it do? It will go over, so you have the string. Now, each particular element of the string is at each index. So H here is the first alphabet. This is the first index. Second one is E. Third one is L. Fourth one is L. Fifth one is O. Sixth one is a space bar, and so on. And it keeps on going, right? Remember, Python always starts from the 0th index. So when I said first, I actually meant formally when you write it, it will be 0. So when you do this, you will see that the unique letters will become this. This is the set. It will only take the unique elements. So L is repeating twice, but in the set, L is not repeating twice because set only contains unique elements. But let's say you don't want to have the space bar. You only want to have the alphabets. So what you can do is you can combine now a conditional statement. So you create an empty set, which is unique letters. Then you iterate for letter in letters, right? For letter in letters, only go and append the letter if the letter is an alphabet. So letter dot is alpha is basically a method for a string which checks if the value inside the string is an alphabet or not. Only if this statement holds true, only then you add it. Otherwise, you don't do anything, right? There's nothing happening within that loop. So when the letter becomes a spacebar and it goes inside, it sees if letter is alpha, which is false. Nothing gets executed. It has to go back to the loop and go to the next letter. So now if you do this, and okay, so we have not run this. Let's run this. Now if you do this, you will see that unique letters doesn't have a spacebar. Now, this is a method without using comprehension. How do you do the same thing with using comprehension, right? So what you can do is, again, the same syntax. Letter, you just need to take letter. You don't need to perform any operation on top of that. So letter for letter in letters. So for each letter in letters, it will basically append or add the letter if letter dot is alpha. So I'm adding the if condition to the end. And we will dive into this in a lot of detail tomorrow, right? Or in the next class. So if letter is alpha, only then do you do it, right? And so you will see that using this, the unique letters has been created. And this is exactly the same what we were doing with 4 lines of code. We are doing it with 1 line of code, right? See the compactness, see the power of comprehensions. Okay, let's now go to dictionary comprehensions. Again, very, very similar. However, dictionary items are actually key value pairs. So when you are creating a dictionary comprehension, you need to mention the key and the value, both of them, right? So dictionary comprehensions create new dictionaries from iterables. They provide a compact way to define key value pairs for the dictionary. The basic syntax is new dict is equal to key expression colon value expression for item in iterable. And you can have an if condition towards the end. But the key here is you don't only have an expression here. You need to have a key expression and you need to have a value expression, right? The key expression will define the key for every entry and the value expression will define the value for every entry in the dictionary. So let's see how this happens. Now, I've taken the same list numbers. I want to create a dictionary containing keys as numbers and the values as their squared value. Now, without using comprehension, first I will initialize the empty dictionary. Number dict is empty, right? So remember, this is a dictionary. Then I will iterate for number in numbers, right? This is how you actually add elements to a dictionary. Remember this. Number dict, which is an empty dictionary, I am basically calling the key. So number is the key. So it's empty. So there is nothing called number right now, right? So if I do this, numbers underscore dict is this, and if I call numbers underscore dict 1, there is nothing, right? It's a key error. There is no key called 1. There's no key called 1. But what am I doing here? I'm doing the same thing, but I'm assigning that. So numbers dict number, right, is equal to the value, that is that square of that number. So here actually dictionary, what it will do is it will append that element as a key value pair into the dictionary, right? So this happens for every number. For number in numbers, number dict is number is equal to number squared. And you will see that after doing this, this is the number dict, right? Let me comment this out. Okay. So the method using comprehension is you create a number dict is equal to, remember you need to use the same curly braces, number colon number squared. So the first one is the key expression, which is just number. You want the keys to just be the numbers in that numbers list. And the values you want to be the squared of that number. So number squared for number in numbers. So I've just done the same thing, right? For number in numbers, do this. And it is doing it for me. And you have the same output that you had earlier. With 3 lines of code, what you did, now we are doing it with 1 line of code. All right, so this is all for today. Just a quick recap. What we studied today is we introduced comprehensions in Python, right? We talked about why they are beneficial, why also they are called comprehensions as such. We talked about list comprehensions mainly to start with, right? We then talked about set comprehensions, which are very similar to list comprehensions, just that you are creating a set. And we also looked at an if condition within the set comprehension. How do you use if statements, right, as a sample? And then we talked about dictionary comprehensions, where you're actually having key value pairs. And how do you do that? Now, going forward, tomorrow what we are going to talk about is using multiple conditionals within the comprehensions. You can use if statement, you can use if else statements, right? And you can do a lot of other things, and it becomes more and more complicated, right? If you have a complex code of, let's say, 5 to 6 lines, you can compress it and create it into a single line of code as well. And this is where I want you to think and reason this more out. Whenever you're writing code, think about, can you make it compact? Can you make it more readable? Do you really need all of those lines or not? Right? Sometimes you might just need it for readability, but other times you can do it in a more compact manner. So it's sometimes a judgment choice, and definitely think about this in detail. So if you have any questions, as always, feel free to put them in the chat. I will get back to you as soon as I can, and I will see you in the next class.